So as Ty said, my name's Anna Teeter. I'm our novel oilseeds program manager. What that means is I'm here to bring new and novel oilseeds to the countryside and bring these programs to farmers. So my role at Cargill is really to spread the word and the market opportunity for camelina. And so my initial session here is going to be probably a little bit shorter so that Matt has a little bit more time to get into the agronomy of this crop because there's a lot of considerations to understand. But we wanted to start with a little bit of the excitement of the market opportunity because there's not every day that you get to participate in building a new crop and actually have a market available for it. So as I think many of you are familiar with, renewable fuels, sustainable aviation fuel, all of these kind of low carbon fuels have and will continue to have demand globally. We expect this number to double by 2040. And so as you can see on our little graphic here, SAF is going to make up a third of that demand by 2040. So there's going to be huge growth potential in this type of fuel. This is really unique opportunity because the products that are made out of things like winter camelina are a drop-in replacement for sustainable aviation fuel. So it's a really great opportunity for growers to provide a solution to help decarbonize and actually provide more feedstock for this demand. And of course, that feedstock can also comprise things like soy, corn, cooking oil, other oil seeds. There is going to be a lot of potential options going into this market, and camelina and other oil seeds are going to be one of the great solutions for that. So what makes a good biofuels feedstock? I get this question a lot of, well, why camelina? There's a couple of really key pieces that drive policy that help encourage the right kinds of feedstocks. So number one, and most importantly, we don't want to pit food and fuel against each other. We want to make sure that these crops complement an already existing food production system. We want to make sure that these are low input crops and they reduce carbon emissions, meaning we're not burning more fuel to grow it than we are to be able to use it. There needs to be a reliable income stream all the way down the value chain. So the folks who are using the fuel, like the airliners, there's the folks like us who want to be able to offer this crop to farmers. And then, of course, farmers need to find this system profitable as well. So we have to check all of those boxes for this to work. In addition, it has to work in the areas where farmers are. So can these crops be grown in areas where they can be crushed? And it has to fit into an existing cropping system. I think this is a really important piece that we're not trying to change or modify existing rotations, but instead enhance them. So those are some of the really important pieces of a biofuels feedstock. The other piece that really helps make some of these novel oil seeds appealing is that they have a very high oil content, like canola. That's usually about a 40% oil content in these seeds versus something like soy maybe is 20% as a reference point. So when you're including something like camelina into your rotation, you're now increasing your total oil acreage or oil production per acre. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, we are not getting more ag land to produce more oil, so we have to intensify the oil we do produce. So to help visualize some of this cropping system for all of you, and especially here in the upper Midwest, we want to make sure that we are incorporating this in the open, viable shoulder seasons that we all experience growing corn, soy, wheat, and these traditional commodities. As you can see in this graphic here, you imagine you're a traditional corn harvest, you have your corn stubble sitting there, and then the land sits fallow for 6 months of the year, especially here in Minnesota where it's really cold. I mean, that crop comes off in October and you don't plant anything sometimes until May. That's a full 6 months with nothing happening on the soil if you don't plant any sort of cover crop or winter crop. And as Dr. White showed us, Minnesota is definitely a laggard, as is Iowa and the Dakotas. Wisconsin's doing a little better, but most of these states are less than 5% coverage. Now, if we incorporate something like winter camelina, we now have the ability to say, here is the opportunity to capture more crop per acre without disrupting the existing rotation. And so that concept is extremely important and very, very valuable to the policies that are being written that support the biofuels industries, particularly around novel oilseeds. So, winter camelina. It's an extremely hardy oilseed, and it performs like a cover crop, but pays like a cash crop. And when I say extremely winter hardy, I mean this crop has been grown all the way up into Canada with minimal snow cover, minimal moisture. This is a very, very tough crop. I would say it's very much on par to cereal rye. As I mentioned before, has a high oil content. About 40% of what comes out of this crop when you crush it is oil, which makes it very valuable because it's efficient. On top of that, the meal byproduct, which is similar to canola meal, a product that livestock producers and other meal users are already familiar with, which means there's an understood acceptance of the byproducts of this crop. That meal is also high in protein and quite marketable. So when you now include the double crop or relay crops system, you're now increasing, again, your total oil per acre, as well as the total protein per acre, solving both the food and the fuel needs that our landscape is going to be facing here in the future. So I get this question a lot from growers, where has it been grown? And I wanted to put down a map of Cargill's experience of where we've had growers or other research sites actually grow this crop. And like I mentioned before, it's been grown all the way to the Canadian border, down into central Iowa. We actually had a field grown in southern Nebraska this year, and into the central and western Dakotas, all the way into Wisconsin. I think that there's more geographic coverage that this crop can cover, but we have to be able to get that crop to West Fargo, which is where Cargill is actually crushing this crop. The other thing to note on this graphic is the type of cropping system that these growers are operating under. Really far up north, or growers who are very, very new to the crop and aren't exactly sure what their plan are, may be experiencing a single crop rotation, but are increasing the total amount of production and oil per acre. A lot of growers are really trying to maximize their ROI and utilize a double crop or a relay crop system. And you can see as soon as you go a little bit north of Fargo, down into Iowa, there's opportunity to increase or utilize that extra growing season that comes out of growing this crop and taking advantage of the different potential rotations, which Matt will spend some more time talking about. I also get this question a lot. There's been a lot of news about what is the biofuels policy looking like in supporting this crop. Where is this crop going to go? You know, with the newest legislation that was passed with the big, beautiful bill, is there really going to be support for a crop like camelina? And my answer to that is this is a global demand, and Cargill is a global company. We are able to utilize this crop and take it to where we can grow it and to where the demand is. And what I wanted to demonstrate on this map is all of the different areas across the globe that are able to grow different novel oil seeds, as well as ones that are asking for it. Canada, the US, Australia, Southeast Asia, China, Japan, Europe. All of these countries already have active policies, including SAF and sustainable aviation fuel usage, in declining the amount of fossil fuels-based fuel they use for their airlines. Which means while today the US's biofuels policy is very focused on corn and soy, and I'm really glad that we have that opportunity to bring those crops into those markets, there are other markets for some of these newer novel oil seeds to participate in as well. And if you look at the different policies that are listed here, the ones in Asia are really just country-specific blend mandates. But what we see in California and in Europe are that there's also a virgin vegetable oil cap on these products. meaning they're only going to accept somewhere between 7 and 20% of soybean oil, canola oil, corn ethanol, until they say that's as much as we take. We now need to find something else to fill that gap that is a lower input crop. And that's where something like these novel oil seeds come in to help fill that gap. All right. One of the last pieces about policy that I want to get into is what actually needs to be true to drive the demand for novel oil seeds. You need to have eligible and available feedstock. So is there enough, and is there the policy and the technology to be able to manufacture novel oil seeds into fuel? And is that technology there to convert that fuel efficiently? So about 80% of what is produced out of vegetable oil is able to be converted to fuel versus something like corn ethanol, which might be closer to 46%. And so as that technology develops, I'm sure that percentage will go up and become comparable, but that comes with a cost. There's also a need to minimize land use change. When we see the activity going on in South America, there's concerns about land use change. And so countries like Europe or the state of California have very strict definitions of what can be done on the land and when has it been done. So are we converting land to grow more crops? Are we not? Typically not something that we see as an issue in the US, but is a requirement for a lot of these other markets. Is that crop certifiable? That's a really important piece. Can we say that these crops were grown with certainty to the field? So the industry is really trying to prevent any accusations of greenwashing, and the best way to do that is to go in and verify and certify these products. And then lastly, cost effective. We have these mandates in place in different countries, but they're only going to be so effective if they're extremely expensive. And so one of the cheapest ways that we can meet some of these goals is growing these additional crops. So the program that Cargill is offering, I think that's something that's really exciting. It is hopefully going to be a stable and long-term market, and it's something that we're really proud to offer. We're going into our third year. Some of the details here are not finalized, but will be very, very shortly. But we're confident enough that I can give you some estimates here. Camelina today is going to be priced off of soybean futures with an additional flat risk payment. So assume soybean futures with about $1.50 added on to that futures price. Then we have the planting seed. Cargill is not in the business to be a seed company. Don't worry, Albert Lee Seeds. But we wanted to make sure for the first couple of years that the right varieties were available to growers at a reasonable cost. And so for the next year or two, we will have seed available. If you want to work with your own seed companies that you're familiar with, we have no problem with you doing that. This program is also an act of God contract on a buyer's call. So what that means, we assume the full production of the crop. And when we need to crush that crop, we will call you to come and bring that crop to West Fargo. The last 2 years, it's been a farm pickup program, meaning we come get it, or a FOB program. This next year, I think we'll be offering a FOB or delivery program, and we'll have that pricing out here very, very shortly. Typically, we've seen that our crush happens in mid-August, and that delivery should be occurring in early July. As this crop grows bigger, we will likely see storage needs for this crop extend further past August and into the winter months. Hopefully, eventually it'll be year-round, like you would see most traditional crush opportunities. One of the things that Matt will talk about is crop insurance, but until that gets more clarified, Cargill is offering a $125 guaranteed minimum revenue payment, which basically means it's the floor on your contract. If you underproduce your crop and say you get much less than you were expecting, we will offer and make sure that you have $125 an acre minimum revenue on that crop. You do have to take the crop to harvest to qualify. Just some other important specs. Moisture at delivery should be about 10%. This is a small seed. It does dry down fairly well. but that moisture component is really important for storage as well. This is an oil seed. It does have a potential risk for heating if it's not cool and dry during storage. Foreign material percentage or dockage is 12%. That's very, very high compared to traditional commodities, but we understand that working with this crop, and you'll see some of the pictures here going forward of what it looks like, can be a little challenging. And so as technology adopts, that number will likely go down as growers get more efficient with cleaning the seed. And then we're asking for a 50-acre minimum for growers who are doing a pickup program so that our trucks are full. So those are some of the basic details of what this contract will look like. If you have more questions, I'm happy to take them later. But I did want to also walk through an economic example, because a lot of growers go, well, does this really actually mean I'm going to make more money per acre? And so what I did was I broke down a single crop for soy on the top. So we have soy futures price. We have that risk payment, which means our camelina price would be $12 an acre. We assume a 58 bushel yield average for soy and a 20 bushel yield for camelina. It's a 50-pound bushel in case you're wondering. If you have a single crop of soy, including, I picked some average input costs that did not include land rent. I think this was from the Iowa State guides. Then your net profit, when you multiply your yield times your price, is $233 an acre. If you grow camelina alone, it's $105 an acre. So I'm not encouraging anybody to grow this crop alone. The policy doesn't want it. The economics aren't there. However, when you start looking at double and relay cropping, and we'll get into the details of how to do these things, double cropping is just like they do in the I-states with wheat, where you harvest the one crop and then plant the next. Relay cropping is when you plant your crop into the camelina. So say you plant soybeans into your standing camelina in the spring. What you see is there is going to be some reduction in soybean yield, and I have that built into the assumptions. For a double crop, I assumed a 25% yield reduction in soy, and for a relay crop, I assumed a 10%. And these are based off of values that we have actually seen in the field. When you take that with the input costs, add these all up, you get $236 an acre for the double crop and $312 an acre for the relay crop. So if you find the difference between that and the net profit for soy, you're looking at $2 an acre above for a double crop. That may not be particularly appealing, but I was very conservative in what these numbers could look like. We've seen growers get up to 24, 25 bushels to the acre, and we've seen almost no impact on soy and double crop. There are potential opportunities, but I wanted to give you realistic numbers. Same with the relay crop. We had one grower who saw close to a 5% or even less reduction in his soybean yield. So it's something that we definitely see as growers refine the system, more economic opportunity. The other thing that we see is that there's a reduction in herbicide passes. This crop is very, very good at competing with weeds. And so that was also included in the input costs for soybeans. Some of the hidden values that we are also keeping in mind are the even distribution of labor and time. So growers really like the fact that these are fields I don't have to worry about first thing in the spring. You have other fields that you need to take care of, get those done, and then you can come back to these at the very end of the season to either plant your soybeans or harvest. There's more distributed combine usage. You know, instead of having a crop or a piece of equipment that you're using 35 days of the year, you're now using it for another week of the year, getting more usage out of that combine. You still have your soil health benefits. This crop is a great crop for increasing your water infiltration. It's preventing you from doing more tillage, which is great for your soil health. It also is a very efficient user of nutrients, so it's holding on to excess nutrients and using them efficiently, and it can help reduce your soybean cyst nematode pressure. Last and definitely not least, there are many, many avenues of additional funding out there, whether it's through the university and their ECO program, whether it's through the county, your SWCD, through the NRCS. I've seen somewhere between $20 and $80 an acre in additional payments with this crop. So now you take that with your profit over soy, and these numbers really start to make sense. So why winter camelina? You've got your cover crop benefits, you're protecting that soil, or you're holding it in place. There's access to a new and emerging market. It's not every day that we get to feel like our grandfathers 50 years ago or 70 years ago when they brought in soybeans, and we get to develop these opportunities. There's economic value to a cover crop in an area where cover crops can be really tough to include. Not impossible. There's plenty of people today who have talked about doing it, but this is another avenue to add to that opportunity. And there's a demand for it from commitments to lowering carbon intensity in fuel usage. So with that, I just want to thank everybody. I'm excited to answer questions at the end once Matt is done, but there's my contact information on the slide there, and I can put it in the chat if you would like. But I am going to kick it over to Matt. So Matt, take it away.
Thanks, Anna. And thanks to the folks at Albert Lee Seed for having us here today to talk a little bit more about camelina. So I'm going to give a little bit more of the agronomic background on the crop. But before I do that, if you're not familiar with Forever Green writ large, I did want to give a little context into terms of who we are and what we're doing. So we are located at the University of Minnesota. We're an integrated research and commercialization platform commercializing new and novel crops for the upper Midwest. So we have a very integrated research team that is made up of, plant breeders, food science folks, agronomists, people across the research spectrum to advance these new crops. And why winter annual and perennial crops? Well, Anna teed it up pretty well, because these are crops that act like cover crops in the landscape, but they have the added benefit of being something you can harvest at the back end. So the economic pull, so to speak, at the back end kind of increases the utilization of these crops that serve all the same ecosystem functions as a cover crop, but have that added benefit that, if you don't have animals in your rotation and can't derive value from, using cover crops as forage, you can harvest these crops as grain. Some of you may have heard this term continuous living cover crop systems. That's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about these new and novel crops for the upper Midwest that can slot into our rotations here. And Anna's graph really kind of illustrated this point really well. This is just another way to look at this. This is the late Don Wise's graphics that kind of shows green and growing cover from a satellite image, and very similar. Why we're focusing on winter annual and perennial crops is to plug these shoulder seasons that are open and not utilizing, keeping the soil covered, pulling nitrates out of the system. This is really why we're focusing on crops that kind of can, keep the coverage on the landscape, keep green and growing plant material and roots on the soil year round. That's the goal. And, we're dealing with a lot of emerging challenges in this space as well. A lot that we, are continuing to throw us curveballs every year. Number one being the changing climate. 10 of the wettest and the hottest years have happened in Minnesota since 2000, and those changes are most marked in winter nighttime temperatures. That middle graphic is average change in temperatures in Minnesota in nighttime. So it's more pronounced in the northern portions of the state, but we are seeing the active consequences of climate change right now, and it's something that is a challenge that we're going to have to continue to adapt to moving forward. Those shoulder season crops without cover crops obviously leads to, things that I think we're pretty all well familiar with. When nitrate leaves the system, it can pollute waterways and groundwater that's used for both animals and for people, and lead to soil loss from the farm as well, which is productivity writ large that is leaving the farm. So not saying that, camelina is going to save the world or anything, but it is one potential solution to add diversity to the system and try to address some of these challenges. And the real dynamic benefit of it is it's driven by an emerging market, and we're really pleased to have Cargill's, ongoing support in creating a market for this, because that's everything for building, momentum for a new crop to get established in the landscape, is to have a place to sell it. And again, another way to illustrate this with these shoulder seasons, if you look at the bottom two graphics, these two photos are side by side, one being a field prepped for corn and beans planting, juxtaposed against the bottom right photo, which has winter camelina on it. So those two systems can coexist side by side. The one on the right, has less erosion happening, less nitrate leaching, and those soil health benefits that we're looking for, with the added benefit that camelina is going to be taken to harvest and has a home, for the marketing. So we're developing 15 to 16 new novel crops that kind of fit this mold. But to give a little bit more detail on camelina specifically, it is a brassica. So same plant family as a radish and turnip and canola. And it actually has been a crop for quite a long time. It was kind of displaced in the US and Canada in favor of canola, but it's been in development for a long time. And I would echo what Anna said about its winter hardiness. It's one of its unique attributes, especially when you're talking about a state like Minnesota, that finding crops that are newer that can actually winter is of really premium importance. And the biggest market thus far is for biofuels, like Anna described to you all. But there is kind of emerging markets that are happening alongside that as well, in terms of the research components to kind of add additional market streams to this, which would be food grade, oil, and meal. Right now, the oil is utilized for animal food uses outside of or animal feed uses, I should say, outside of the U.S. So that's a further development point that we can look forward to in the future. Also, the feed, for this to be a viable market, there's going to have to be byproducts that are utilized beyond just the oil, and that's something that is ongoing. I think there was a question earlier about inclusion rate for feed, and to my understanding, it's about 10% right now. That's kind of what's been proven out by research, but maybe we can get into that a little bit later if Anna has more updated numbers on that. And I would just mention that we did publish an updated grower's guide for this. I'll pop that in the chat after I'm done talking here. But a lot of this information, if you want to reference it later, is all going to be in this guide. And again, camelina has kind of the added benefit that it's had a lot more distribution on acres just as a cover crop. So this guide is not referencing cover crop use specifically. It's more on raising the crop for grain. But I think, a lot of the general premise still remains true that, camelina, the more you treat it like a crop, even if you're planting it as a cover crop, the better success you're going to have overall. So just to kind of dive into some of the nitty gritty on what we're looking at in terms of varieties and how it's managed across most of Minnesota. So there's one of two varieties that are kind of out there in the landscape. The University of Minnesota is actively breeding this crop for many agronomic characteristics, larger seed size, higher yield, shorter stature, better standability. But the number one characteristic we're breeding for right now is rapid flowering. So we want this crop to cycle and be off quick enough where we can feasibly and economically viably plant a soybean into it or plant a double crop bean after it. That's really the goal. So the earlier maturing line is in the seed increase stages. Doesn't have a release name yet. Cargill is doing some early evaluation on it, but that is something that is going to be waiting in the wings in terms of variety development. But as of right now, Joel and Dakota Early Riser are kind of your standard winter camelina varieties, and for all intents and purposes, they're the same thing. It's just if you're considering growing this crop, though, be sure to ask for winter camelina, because camelina can mean either spring or winter. If you're just asking for it, generally speaking. So definitely want to lean in and make sure you know what you're getting before you're going to be planting it. despite how small it is, 400,000 seeds per pound is a pretty small seed, but it can emerge from depth. So, it doesn't need to be planted at a quarter inch or anything. It can emerge from up to an inch deep, but I would say in general, half to 3/4 inch is probably what we're going to be recommending across the board. And 6 to 8 pounds to the acre is the recommended rate for grain right now. Now that will probably be updated as people's knowledge level increases with the crop. You can imagine, again, 400,000 seeds per pound, 6 to 8 pounds to the acre. That's a lot of seed going out. And we've had producers that have scaled that back quite significantly, at least by half, that have more experience raising canola and other crops. So I think this will kind of be an adaptive management, and based on what your equipment is and what your comfort level is with how finely you can tune your equipment. 6 to 8 pounds to the acre for most people just starting out is a pretty good bet because it gives you some insurance on the seed, and the seed is not that expensive. As kind of a mental benchmark, it's about the same planting window as winter wheat for the upper Midwest with kind of a longer tail at the back end. So we've had people plant this all the way into November, and still have decent success with winter survival. And I would say that planting window still holds true. And, the real trick these past 2 years is just getting a reliable rain in the fall to get it started. But the plant is very hardy for the most part. If it gets a shower on it in the fall in that window, it's going to do fine. Rotationally speaking, that kind of sets you up for, crops that come off in time to get it planted: small grains, dry beans, soybeans, silage corn, canning crops. It can fit in after full season soybeans, depending on when those come off and what the fall gives us too. So just as kind of in general, it kind of slots in pretty nicely for people that already have some diversity in their rotation, but it can fit into a standard 2-crop corn and soybeans rotation as well. And we already talked about the markets a little bit. Sorry, the formatting got a little wonky, but yeah, biofuels is kind of the number one market for this crop right now. In terms of yield, this is mainly reflections that we saw from the pilot program in Minnesota that Cargill was running. So it's not exactly science-based, more like grower reflections. We saw yields anywhere from about 600 to 1,300 pounds to the acre, with an average last year of about 600 to 800 pounds to the acre. Now, I would say that a lot of the growers in this program, this was their first time ever raising the crop. So, there's somewhat of a learning curve with planting the crop. Now, I would also mention that you don't need specialized equipment to grow this crop. You don't need specialized equipment to harvest it. So you can use a standard bean head to pick it up. You can use your drill or whatever you have on the farm to plant it. But some modifications will really make your life easier and help meet some of those contract specs on the back end, especially the FM. A new set of screens for the combine can really help winnow out some of the trash in the field and some of the pods and get, help the harvest sample dry down. But in general, 1,000 pounds to the acre is kind of a good benchmark mentally to think about when you're thinking about, what's the yield potential of this crop. The first yield that I've seen reported this year, it was on a certified organic field, was about an average of 1,100 to 1,200 pounds to the acre. And I would say for this particular grower, everything went right. The stand was great. It survived the winter. Excellent. They had plenty of fertility there. And surprisingly, under organic management, there was hardly any weeds that came up under this crop. So smashing success for those folks. But I think we'll get more yield numbers as time goes on here. We're a little bit later than we were from last year, just in terms of harvest time frame. Normal harvest time frame, if everything goes well, would be late June to early July. About the earliest I heard harvest this year was about the 4th of July. So that can definitely be the case. So how well the crop gets established in the fall and what the spring conditions give us will determine kind of what the harvest date ends up being for the most part. You can swath it, you can desiccate it to ease harvest. We've had some people do both. You can also straight cut it too. And, there is kind of standard adjustments you can make, just using a traditional corn and soybeans combine. you're better off kind of making some adjustments ahead of time. A lot of manufacturer settings do have either flax or canola, which can be a good place to start with. Some kind of general watchouts for the crop. It doesn't love really soggy, saturated soils. It can handle heavy soils as long as it's well drained, but it has a lot of western movement. It's very drought tolerant throughout the Dakotas into Montana, but really where it doesn't thrive is really, heavy, wet, soggy soils. The other place we've seen folks get tripped up right from the get-go is residual herbicides. Camelina is a very small seed. It's susceptible to the same, carryover pre-emerge herbicides that other cover crops like turnip and radish and would be susceptible to. So that's kind of a good analog. In that grower guide, we do have a pretty extensive list of chemistry rotational restrictions. So that would be something good to think through, for a large part, even maybe 12 to 18 months ahead of time to make sure that your chemistry program is set up where you're not negatively impacting the crop before you even start. The small seed size can be a challenge, no doubt about it. Handling a seed size that small, if you're not familiar with it, it's a pretty big leap. But people that have had some experience, like I mentioned earlier, with canola, small grains, it can be done. And like I mentioned earlier too, you don't need specialized equipment to pick this crop up or to store it. There's still additional agronomic recommendations to kind of sort through with the relay crop system. I can talk about a little bit there. And I think timing as well is going to be a little bit of a moving target depending on what the weather gives us. And the weather has been anything but predictable the last few years, especially. So it's kind of a good visual about planting date. This is kind of what informed our planting dates shifting around some, because we initially thought that we could set a planting date of early September and go for it. And what that means is the camelina looks really beautiful in the fall, and it almost gets to the point where it's starting to want to flower out in the fall. And that lessens its winter hardiness big time. So people that planted this in the fall of 23 on the earlier side of September got really decent growth, really good establishment, but the winter kill was a lot higher than people who planted later. And so we're kind of timing that camelina almost like winter wheat, where you just want it to be spiking up going into the winter. Camelina this small in that center picture that was planted towards the tail end of September in 23, that was super small, ended up surviving the winter a lot better than well-established camelina. So there's a balance there. And again, some of the conditions that we're seeing in the fall especially can really influence what the crop is going to look like, especially this past year where it was super damn dry, didn't rain for most people until almost the tail end of October. And that really determined how well the camelina performed across the board. We also had another open winter with very cold temperatures and little snow cover. And so for some people, they saw really good survival where there was kind of shelter in the field. That top photo and the bottom photo there are from the same field, just about 20 feet apart. And the rows on top were right next to the drainage ditch, where there was a little elevation and a little maybe better snow catch, less wind blowing. And the bottom portion was 20 feet away, where there was no protection for that camelina. And so those two situations in the fall, especially dryness and the severity of the winter, a little bit outside of your control. But I would add a caveat that we've seen unprecedented winter injury on winter grains as well. I walked fields of dead winter rye this spring, which is pretty unusual. So the severity of the winter was dealt kind of a rough hand across the board. Other kind of general management considerations, camelina can be, really the gold standard to get the crop out there would be to plant it after grain corn. The only problem is the crop grows fine under corn, but the minute you blow all that residue on top, the plant does not like trying to grow through residue. So it likes some residue to help catch the snow and to, lessen the severity of, especially open winters, but there's a balance there. The minute you start piling up inches of residue, that's going to suppress and kill the plant there. So the main thing you're seeing here is research from the ARS station in Morris, where the more they removed the corn stover, the better establishment they got on the subsequent camelina. And that middle section where the arrow is was areas that they deposited a ton of wheat chaff after harvest, and that suppressed the growth of camelina. So you have to manage your residue somewhat, but again, going on soybean residue or small grain stubble can work really well. But the nut that we're trying to crack on the research standpoint is trying to get this integrated after corn. Just to back up Anna's point, yeah, I mean, camelina really doesn't need a whole lot of inputs to be successful. It's not a no input crop, but it's definitely a low input crop. So 50 to 60 pounds to the acre of nitrogen, negligible levels of P and K, can set this up for 100% yield potential. I'm kind of running out of time here, so I won't get into the nitty gritty of this, but there's not a lot of labeled products for winter camelina right now. There are some, mainly the grass-specific herbicides, but the crop does very well under certified organic management, under conventional management of suppressing weeds, assuming it gets well established. We've had it grown successfully, organically, conventionally. The crop can be time weeded organically early on in the season, and it fills out pretty well from that. But I would say overall, in addition to the drainage, that site selection is key, especially you want to keep it off of fields that have had a history of, a large amount of winter rye or hairy vetch or other things like that. This is a good visual of Minnesota, where some of the acres have been distributed. Basically, all the productive agricultural land in the state, it's been tried and has been reasonably successful. And we've seen growth in the amount of acres too. 2,000 acres is a drop in the bucket compared to, the total acreage of the state. But for a new and emerging crop, it's a really big development. And we really see a large amount of growth potential for this crop to be a commodity, like canola across Minnesota. This is just a decent visual of the variety improvement and the breeding that University of Minnesota is doing on the crop. Again, just referencing that the first variety in the wings is going to be this earlier maturing, earlier flowering variety. It matures about a week earlier than your standard Joel or Dakota Early Riser. So that's really the advantage of getting that crop off as soon as possible. So you have more growing season time to accommodate, whatever crop comes next, soybeans, dry beans, sunflower, etc. And I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on some of these detailed on the relay system, because Anna kind of teed that up pretty well. I think overall we had a few growers try it last fall, and we've had more kind of try it at scale. So this is kind of an ongoing subject of research kind of on farm. And I think this is one situation where farmers are going to figure this out at scale a lot faster and a lot more viably than we can keep up on small plot trials. But there is a good amount of small plot trial work that's been done for 20 to 30 years on this crop to really kind of, queue us up for success moving forward. But really it's, producers doing this at scale and really kind of troubleshooting this with the research that's really going to take this forward in a big way. So let's talk about insurance a little bit. So there is relay crop insurance out there already. If you're in the southeastern portion of Minnesota, all of Wisconsin, that light tan color or yellowish color, all of those regions of the U.S. they don't have to have 3 years of yield history. They can get a written policy on relay crop right now. Now you still do have a written policy is kind of like a to order insurance product. So you still have to find somebody that would be willing to write you an insurance policy, but everywhere else that's in the blue, you do have to have 3 years of yield history before you can get a written policy. So that'd be something you'd be doing off insurance if you wanted to do the relay crop system. But this was kind of interesting. This just came across the wire a few days ago. We've been in talks with RMA, as has Cargill, to open up this program for insurance coverage on camelina. It was in place for North Dakota, but not Minnesota and some other states. But now camelina insurance is available nationwide. That's great. And that'll be starting in 2026. Now it covers your annual production history, so you still need the records. So for most people, unless you've been growing camelina for the last few years, it's probably still going to have to build up the 3 years of yield history. But it's a really great development and something that's going to continue to move forward here. But you do need a contract with pricing as well. The insurance coverage is all based on the contract that's going to be signed with a Cargill or another buyer. And it's still a written agreement, so you'd have to find an insurer that'd be willing to work with you. So top line takeaways here. Winter camelina is very adapted to our climate. I think that's been seen on a research basis and throughout this pilot program. It's very happy in our growing season and with our climate. Not surprisingly, when there's a viable market partner like Cargill out there offering contracts, that really juices the market along and creates a lot of natural buy-in for people with these new and emerging crops to really expand in a big way. Markets are everything. It's a fairly low input crop, but it's not a no input crop. Like everything else, the more you treat it like a crop and fertilize it like a crop, the better success you're going to have. So that's kind of what we've seen borne out with people's early experience with managing it as well. I would say the fall winter weather can still be an X factor, but planting it after small grains or onto soybeans is a good bet to start with. There is going to be ongoing variety development that'll make this crop more viable moving forward or continue to improve it. And there is kind of a growing supply chain around this crop as well, including mobile cleaning and aggregation. There's one grower that has grown camelina for the last few years that has invested in a mobile cleaning setup for that, for camelina. So if that's something that you're thinking about doing, this kind of market development is happening in tandem with people's experience with growing the crop. But I would say the top 3 considerations to think through with growing camelina would be carryover chemistry and site selection, harvest machinery, and storage. Those would be the top 3 things to think through if you're thinking about growing camelina. Last thing I'll mention is there is state support in Minnesota for growing camelina through the ECO program. And this is a state of Minnesota clean water dollars that are being invested to incentivize and de-risk production of not only camelina, but kernza, hybrid rye, and winter barley as well. So if anybody in the audience grows those 3 crops in addition to camelina, this is something that you should for sure be taken advantage of. So it acts like a regular cover crop incentive program where you get $20 to $40 to the acre for planting the crop. It also offers kind of like crop insurance on the back end. So if the crop fails, there's some marketing issue, say a winter kills, or you take it to harvest and don't quite match up to the yield expectations, there is dollars available to kind of capture that benefit on the back end as well. So just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. And as an add-on for that program, there is additional support for people, financial support for people trialing the camelina and soybean system. So that's definitely kind of an add-on there. And I breezed through the last portion pretty fast, but I appreciate the folks at Albert Lee Seed having us here, and hopefully we have enough time for questions.
All right, thank you, both of you. Yes, we do. I guess while I sit through here, and I guess the main one thing I have question is, sorry if I missed it. Is there any plans to expand the crushing of winter camelina? West Fargo is kind of a trek from here.
Yeah,
made that commute many times attending college. So.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. Today, the biggest hurdle is finding elevators that will be a drop point. And so that's something that we're actively working on because we recognize there is such a hunger to grow this crop. It's just figuring out how logistically we get it to West Fargo if it's not done by truck. So I guess my comment to that is stay tuned. We're actively working on expanding that coverage out, but it does take time, and we need to have a reasonable base of growers in an area before we can justify having an elevator there. So I'm optimistic. I'm really excited. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for this crop going east, west, south.
Good, good. Yeah, and so Margaret has a question here. Does the glycosinolate content of camellia meal cause any refusal or negative animal performance? And what amount can be
Yeah,
included in the feed ration?
great question. So, today, like Matt mentioned, glucosinolates in camelina and other novel oilseeds like pennycress are a concern. The really interesting thing is most of the research that's been done has been done. So there's two steps to a crush plant. You expeller press it, which means you squeeze all the oil out of it, and then you hexane extract it, which means you use solvent to take the rest of it out. All of the research today has been done on the expeller pressed meal, which does have a high content of glucosinolates, which is not great for animal health. If you hexane extract that product, that meal is now those glucosinolates are broken down. There's a heat and time component that helps break those products down. It is now significantly more comparable to canola, which is awesome. Means you can use it further and wider. Now we just need the research to catch up so that we can increase the inclusion rates. But today it's 10% for broilers, layers, and cattle. But hopefully some updates coming very shortly to increase some of those numbers. It's a good question.
All right, good. Yeah, and that's what Margaret's here for. Another question of her. When relay cropping, does the stripper head work above the canopy of the soybean canopy? And you have
So Matt,
yeah, love it. You have an opinion on that or experience?
Yes, I have heard that kind of secondhand the stripper head can be used for camelina. Now, I don't have a ton of experience with it because they're not super common in Minnesota. That's much more like wheat country equipment. So yeah, I don't have a ton of finite detail there, but yes, in theory, you can use a stripper header for camelina.
yeah, it works well for the camelina. I think the biggest concern, regardless of the type of combine head, is the clearance from the top of the soybeans to the bottom of the camelina, and that's going to be your biggest concern.
All right, and to kind of expand on that, Jacob was wondering what does the market expansion south and east like to northern Illinois look like?
Yeah, so one of the things, I'll iterate all the things I said before of we just need more access and acres in a concentrated area to justify drop points. The other thing is we just don't know how far south we can take this crop successfully. I know there's been research done down into Ames. And like I said, the furthest south that I've seen is southern Nebraska, but there hasn't been enough repetition in other areas to confidently say that we should bring this crop that far south. So that's something that is at the same time being brought to different universities and research groups of how far south should we be bringing this crop? Because at that point, there may be other crops that are a better fit. So it's a non-answer because we just don't know yet. I'm hoping so, though. I think it'd be a good option for Northern Illinois. As a Wisconsin girl myself, I wanted to see the cover most of the Midwest, but I'm just a little biased.
Yeah, I would just
Yeah.
add that winter camelina is, one of a handful of intermediate oil seeds nationwide that are being explored for this similar usage, and camelina is probably the best fit for our climate. One that's waiting in the wings that's not quite commercialized yet for the upper Midwest is pennycress. And pennycress, at least in terms of our early analysis, seems like it has better southern movement across the board, but then it's also kind of intermingling with some of these other intermediate oilseed crops, which we didn't mention, like carinata and winter canola as you get farther south. Like, I don't think that's really well understood about where those lines are of best fit,
Mhm. And then I apologize if I butchered his name. Sylvania, what about spring camelina? I know I know you mentioned before. Is there any consideration on that? I mean, if you want to pull it further south or on that?
Yeah. So I get this question a lot as well. One of the risks, if we allow a spring camelina program, is where's that spring camelina coming from? Because if we are just inserting a spring camelina into a corn and soybean rotation and just getting rid of your soybean crop altogether, you're just replacing one crop for another, and that's not the goal of a lot of these policies. So the areas where spring camelina is growing a lot of traction is the western Great Plains, where there's a fallow season in their rotation, right? So it might be wheat, fallow, wheat, fallow. You might be able to get spring camelina in that rotation and have the policy support that. But in the Midwest, we really believe that winter camelina and winter crops in those shoulder seasons is really where the opportunity lies today.
So I guess basically kind of looking at is we're Cargill and University of Minnesota are kind of looking at where they're seeing need to fill in the gaps of fallow periods. They're trying to figure out what crops work best for that, trying to create a solution for some problems. Correct?
Absolutely.
All right. All right. Don't see any more questions coming in here. I guess, oh, I just thought of one. I guess one thing here, particularly to you, Matt, is I know there was, when it first came out, a lot of people were considering it for broadcasting or for drone seeding and everything on that. And now the shift has been to more of a drilling it. Can you expand on why that change was made?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to my earlier point about, and this is kind of a general boilerplate statement about cover crops writ large, that the more you plant them and, pay attention to seed to soil contact, the better success you're going to have, and it's a shame in some ways because camelina is such a small seed, and it, it's fairly inexpensive. So looking at it, it's like, oh yeah, that should be perfect for aerial application. And some people have had decent success seeding it that way, but I've also seen people have kind of ho-hum opinions of it, even as a cover crop, like, oh, I applied it and I didn't really see much. So I think that's the main reason why it's like you wouldn't broadcast oats or corn or anything else. So the more you actually plant it in the ground and get decent seed to soil contact, the better success you're going to have across the board. You can broadcast it and roll it, but again, it's really paying close attention to seed to soil contact. That pass of pressing it into the soil and having a decent seed bed I think is everything with it.